So that following week, Kyle and I kind of went back and forth to Roswell for a bunch of scans. And that's the nice thing about Roswell is that they do everything there. So I'm not going to different buildings for different things. Everything that I've had to have done has all been at Roswell, and they've been fantastic. So we went for a bunch of scans. We went back to see the neurosurgeon the following week, and that's when he told us that it was about the size of a golf ball.
Wow.
And the tumor itself is it was in the left ventricle. So you have a left ventricle, a right ventricle, and a third ventricle, and this is where spinal fluid's made. So this type of tumor, it was in my left ventricle. And again, they don't know how it got there or what happened with it, but it's in my left ventricle, size of a golf ball. And the only way to remove it was going to be with a craniotomy, which is where they cut open my head and go into the ventricle and remove the tumor. And he didn't know if he was going to be able to get it all at that point, but he was hoping that he could treat it with a non-invasive form of treatment, which is called gamma knife, but it was too big. So he did a craniotomy. November 8th was my surgery. And Kyle went, my dad went, and the two of them sat in the waiting room and for like 6 hours. And I spent about a week in the ICU. And I just remember the day he told us about surgery, about getting this surgery. I just remember sitting in the room with Kyle next to me. My parents are across from me. My doctor's on the other side of me. And he's saying, you're going to need a craniotomy. This is what you're going to need. And I just remember seeing my parents' faces like white. They just, like, they were in complete shock. We just couldn't imagine, like, 6 months before, like, we're supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. Like, this is really what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So my parents were in shock. I was in shock. And Kyle sat there and had all these questions for the doctor and wrote down everything, took a ton of notes, and he was very attentive. I was like, thank God, because I was not. Like, I just was not in a place to ask questions. I didn't even know, like, what to ask. So I called my boss after that appointment, and I was like, hey, I'm going to take the day because I just found out I have to have brain surgery. And we went to lunch, and I took a double shot of tequila for us today because I was like, this is how my day is going to go. And this is how our winter is going to be. So that's how I dealt with finding out about the tumor.
Wow.
Like, that's how, and I'm not an alcoholic. I don't really drink that much, but I was just sitting there at lunch, looking at a menu, not hungry. I'm like, I need a shot of something to, like, numb whatever this is that I'm feeling. I need to numb it. And I think the one thing that, like, I pride myself on is that I've been really strong throughout all of this. I didn't really cry. Like, I cried the first day I found out about it just because it was just a lot of emotions. But I was really good about not crying throughout a lot of this. I'm an emotional person, but, like, I was like, let's just get the tumor out. Let's be done with it and move on. So the first day of the day I had surgery, we got up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. We had to be at Roswell by like 5:45. My dad picks us up. We get there. They bring me back into, like, the hospital, and they, like, put a gown on me. They do an IV, which I hate needles. Like, poking, ugh. You'd think I'd be used to it, not. So they do the IV. My dad comes back to say hi. Kyle comes back and sits with me. I meet the anesthesiologist. I meet the OR nurse. My neurosurgeon comes in to see me. And they're like, all right, we're going to bring you back to the OR and we're going to get this going. I'm like, all right, let's rock and roll. Like, let's go.
Wow.
So Kyle leaves and they bring me back. And I woke up in the ICU. And they told me that, you're going to be in the ICU for about 4 or 5 days to recover. And then you'll be in a regular room. And that's exactly what it was. And with COVID, they're very restrictive on visitors. I think it's better now, but it was very strict on visitors at the time. So Kyle and my dad were there for the first day. Kyle and my mom came the second day. And then my sister-in-law ended up flying in. And she came and stayed at our house. And her and Kyle came the next, like, 4 days that I was in the hospital. And then they brought me down to a regular room. I was in a regular room for a couple days. They kept me in the ICU longer than they needed to because I had like brain bleeding. So they kept me longer than they needed to, and I was getting a ton of scans done. And as soon as my neurosurgeon said it was time, like, you can go home today, I was like, thank God, get me out of here. I'm ready to go home. So I came home, and like, I'll be honest, I don't remember that first week of being home. Kyle and I were just talking about it the other day. I don't remember. Like, I remember coming home. I remember some of his friends came over for Monday Night Football. And my sister-in-law was here. We had Chipotle. She and I were laying in bed. I think we were watching Friends. And that's all I really remember for that first week. And that was like 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And then I was home for about a week before I ended up back in the hospital. And I think the only thing I really remember from that week is that I was having really bad headaches. And I was taking the pain meds that they gave me, but it wasn't always working. And I just remember waking up the Sunday before Thanksgiving in a lot of pain. So I had been home like 6 days at this point. I remember waking up, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember like hitting Kyle with my arm saying, like, babe, like, I'm in pain. Like, you need to call, like, now. So he calls Roswell. They want me to come in for a CAT scan. And that was like the first snowstorm that we had. So that was awful because he had to come out and like start the truck and wipe off the snow. And I just remember, like, in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm going in for scans. Like, let me take my ring off. Let me take my earrings off, my nose ring out. Like, let me just leave all this here. And I had shorts on, and I remember just pulling sweatpants over my shorts because I was just so tired and in pain. I remember walking into our kitchen, and he was in the house, and I'm trying to put my coat on. And I remember telling him that I felt like I was going to pass out. And the next thing I knew, I was laying on the floor in the kitchen, looking up at were the people that in the ambulance, an EMT. There was an EMT like looking over me.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up passing out in our kitchen. Kyle caught me, laid me down, and he immediately, and this is from his point of view, from what he's told me, I passed out, so he immediately freaks out. He calls 911. So when an ambulance comes, he then calls my parents. And so I remember waking up. There was an EMT hovering over me. There was a police officer in the kitchen. They had to move furniture in our living room because our house kind of like is, I don't know, the pathway to the front door is kind of weird. So they had to move furniture to get the stretcher to me and get me on the stretcher and get me out the door. And they couldn't bring me to Roswell. They had to take me to Buff Gen because Roswell doesn't have an ER. So I was in the Buff Gen ER all day that day. I don't remember it. I do not remember it. I don't remember being in Buff Gen. There's like little memories that I have, but not really much. But my parents and Kyle are like, yeah, we were there all day. We were at Roswell or at Buff Gen. They told me I passed out again. My mom had taken me to the bathroom, and I passed out in the bathroom. And she had to like get Kyle to help carry me back to the gurney in the ER. And at that point, my dad was furious. My dad wanted me to go back to Roswell, as did my neurosurgeon. They all kept on saying she needs to go back to Roswell. And Buff Gen, Roswell, and I think O'Shea, they're all connected by a bridge. So they brought me across the bridge from Buff Gen to Roswell at night. So this is Sunday night at this point. I'd been there at least 12 hours. They brought me across the bridge back to Roswell. And I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember being in Roswell. But I was able to read the notes that all the doctors and nurses put in my file with Roswell. And from what I understand happened was I had fluid buildup in the ventricle where the tumor was. That's what was causing the headaches. That's what was causing me to pass out. From their notes, I know that I passed out multiple times. I kept on throwing up, and my temperature was all over the place. They were trying to like warm me up, and then they put ice packs on me. And I think that they had just given me so much medication that I ended up going into cardiac arrest. So at that point, the I don't want to say neurosurgeon, the neuro resident on call that night was like, we need to bring her up to the ICU. So they brought me back up to the ICU in Roswell, and they ended up putting a drain in my head. So I had a drain coming out to drain the fluid from the ventricle. It almost looks like an IV bag, like the fluid was going into an IV bag out of my head. And then because my heart was just working like on overload at that point, they ended up putting me on a ventilator. And I was on a ventilator for a few days. And they put me on the ventilator like the Monday before Thanksgiving. So that morning, like 5 o'clock in the morning, they're putting me on a ventilator. And they're calling Kyle. He's not answering because he's sleeping. So Kyle wakes up to a voicemail from the neuro, person saying, "Hey, listen, Angela's, her stats aren't looking good this morning. She kind of took a turn for the worse last night. Give us a call." Like, that's what he woke up to. And
Oh my
like,
God.
my heart, like, it kills me that like he was here, he was home
Mm-hmm.
alone in our bedroom with the dog, like by himself, and he wakes up to the call like that. Like, he's so strong, because I would have lost it. Like, I would have lost my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So he calls my parents, and they drive down there, and because of my heart issues that I was having, now I'm on a ventilator, I had the drain coming out. Because of my heart issues, they wanted me back at Buff Gen, because Buff Gen is known for being
Mm-hmm.
really anything cardio, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
heart issues. They can
Mm-hmm.
handle it. So they're like, "Oh, but we needed to test her for COVID before we transfer her back." And I tested positive for COVID.
Oh my gosh.
So I have a drain coming out of my head.
Yeah.
I'm on a ventilator, and now I test positive for COVID. Great, wonderful. We're on a roll. And so Kyle and my parents had to all go test for COVID, and they had to wait to get their results back before they can come in and see me. And I don't remember any of this because I'm on a ventilator. I'm all drugged up, like
Mm-hmm.
out of it. And I had to get tested again, and it ended up being a false positive. Thank God. So I had a false positive test. Whatever.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
False positive. Right, exactly. Just one more thing on the list. So I had a
Mm-hmm.
false positive test. So they transferred me back to Buff Gen, and they ended up taking the ventilator out the day before Thanksgiving. And I remember waking up to my brother-in-laws at this point. They're in the room with me. The first thing I remember is them being in the room, and my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and Kyle all being in the room. Like, they all came to see me. Like, that's one of the first things I remember. And Kyle tells me, I asked if the Bills won, because that Sunday the Bills were playing a game. And I was, "Did the Bills win? Did the Bills win?" And they're like, "The Bills didn't play today. They play tomorrow." And I'm like, "What day is it?" "It's Wednesday, tomorrow." And I'm like, "Oh my God, did I miss Thanksgiving?" They're like, "No, Thanksgiving's tomorrow." And I'm like, "Oh my God." I'm like,
Yeah.
really excited for Thanksgiving, to be home, family,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
happen. So as soon as everything, cardiovascular was under control, they brought me back to Roswell. And so that was the end of November, getting into December now. And my neurosurgeon had told me that they wanted to do another craniotomy to help relieve the pressure, the fluid pressure. So I still had the drain in my head, and they wanted to poke a hole between the ventricles to help the fluid kind of drain out from one ventricle to the other. He said that there was like this gummy substance that kept on building up in there, and that's why he thinks that the fluid kept on building up. So I think it was like December 5th or 6th, I had my second craniotomy. And they didn't cut fully across my head this time, they just cut like half. Which, 2 craniotomies in a month, like, you would never think that that's a thing.
No.
Nope, they did it. So they cut half, and they did the second craniotomy, and they did what's called, what do they call it? Clamping trials. They called it clamping trials, where they would clamp the drain. So after my second craniotomy, they would clamp the drain to see, like, if the fluid buildup was still there, if it was draining on its own. And I don't remember a lot after that surgery because the fluid buildup was still there. and I couldn't keep any food down. I kept on throwing up any medication they were giving me.